Hello, welcome to Calls with Your Kinky Bestie. I'm Emma. I am a submissive and mentor for fellow kinksters. This podcast is all about insights into kinky life and dating, sharing my personal experience and stories, and help share mindset shifts too to get you into a confident space, more confident than you are now. So get ready. It all starts now. Welcome back, bestie, or welcome if you're new. I've got a really sweet comment over on Instagram that inspired this episode, and so I'm going to read it to you. This comment says, I definitely have some shame since my kink/fetish is intrinsically linked with my autistic self. Sensation play and sensory play with certain textures and tools. I want to engage more with my kink in a constructive manner, but it just feels taboo and stuff. And I thought that this was a really beautiful comment. There's so much here to unpack. I just wanted to take a podcast episode and dive into all of these things. So here are kind of the recurring themes I'm pulling out of this that we're going to chat through. The first one being some of the shame just around like neurodivergent symptoms, and because our behaviors are divergent and not the norm, how there's some shame that we're taught about how people want us to feel about that, or how people do feel about that. So just addressing that some neurodivergent symptoms come with like their own baggage. And then especially when you're bringing in kink, which of course kink is inherently taboo and there's a lot of shame around it. There's really, layers that we're working with. So I wanted to chat through that. And then the other piece that I pulled out from this was this unique situation that a lot of my mentees and that, my community and myself face, which is that we're part of two different communities. So we're part of the neurodivergent community, and we're part of, the kink or the BDSM community. And while there's a lot of overlap between the two, there's also a lot of people in each community that obviously aren't part of the other. And how that kind of creates its own complexities and challenges, and how we as very mindful neurodivergent or neurocomplex kinksters can be conscious of that and be more intentional about what we're hoping to seek from each community and which community we might need at a given time and why, and just how to protect ourselves basically, with all of that in mind. So let's dive in each. We're going to start with, of course, neurodivergent symptoms and how there's a lot of shame just embedded with them to begin with. So the person who commented is autistic. They identify that way. And I don't know this person, so I don't know exactly what all of their symptoms are with that. But that's kind of the point, is that no matter even within a diagnosis, there are variations, and everyone is their own unique person. So the way that, and even with the same symptoms, we might express them in different ways or feel different ways about it. So some of the symptoms that I have with my ADHD, I've got ADHD friends who that's not even on their radar, and the same goes vice versa. In the same way, the way that I'm forgetful, even though that's a symptom that I have with my ADHD, I'm oftentimes forgetful in a different way than someone else might be. So I tend to forget more like social situations and, people's names and what I said 30 seconds ago, rather than forget like losing objects. It's just slightly different. Whereas for someone else, that might be their entire life is just losing their shit, which, and I went through a phase of that too. So even, the way we experience symptoms, and just the symptoms that we have can totally change throughout your life. Like we are humans. Nothing is stagnant. We are changing by nature. That's just the nature of the human condition. So let's address that. So the first one being that, yeah, we all have different symptoms within neurodivergence. So there's kind of two layers. So there's the one layer of a neurotypical person. It oftentimes can be annoyed or just not understand some symptoms that, a neurodiverse person might have. And because the majority of the population is more on this side of the neurotypical, that's where the popular vote lies, right? Like, that's kind of what's expected, is that you're able to operate at this level, and this is what the world is kind of made for, is for people who are operating more in this neurotypical wavelength and behavior set. And so whenever you are in that same world, but you express your humanness a little bit differently, and even it's just the word symptom, like, if I was the only person on the planet, I wouldn't call my forgetfulness a symptom, right? Like, that would just be how I am and who I am. That's only a symptom because we have such a large group of, we have such a large population that we're able to then, subcategorize it into all of these different segments, and symptoms is part of the way that we do that. But it's a made-up term. It doesn't mean anything. So who you are, obviously, is okay. And, that's just who you are and how it is. I think there's a difference between, a symptom and like a mindset. Like, a lot of mindset things can be changed. And of course we can change and train our behaviors over time if we want to. But it's a little different when it comes down to personality traits, So with the majority of our world being neurotypical and the smaller subset of us coming in with all these different neurodivergencies, we're operating a little bit of different ways. So we're facing this rejection and this call out and this even this classification of other from a good bit of the population. So that's where a lot of the shame comes in to begin with, point blank, inherent. You walk out into the world, it's oh, well, why aren't you operating the way I am? This must be bad or wrong because me and my 5 friends do it this way, and you're just the other. So then when we get into this smaller community of not just the community of neurodivergent people, but maybe even a community of people who have the same neurodivergencies that you do, like a same or similar diagnosis. It's like ADHD is slightly different than autism, so I might be having a lot more things in common with the ADHD community, of course. But even within that, because we all experience symptoms in different ways, there's still going to be this element of, even within that, there's otherness, because you are a unique human being. And what's tricky is because with a lot of neurodivergencies, we become really, we're sensitive to rejection, and we're sensitive to that. So we're just aware of it on this different level where, I want to find commonality and I want to find validation. And I feel the same way too. I absolutely do. Do not get me wrong. But it's just slightly different, where even a neurotypical person just might not feel the same way about it. So even within our own, subsets of communities, there's this element of otherness, just because we are all experiencing things in a different way. So as a result of that, you might feel kind of left out of the herd because you do this one thing that your friends don't do, or even people in your neurodivergent community or people who share the same diagnosis than you do. So there's a lot to that, and a lot of it is just that you are different and are straying from the norm, which is what kink is a lot of the times as well. And it's not necessarily that what you're doing is wrong, it's just that we're built in a world that is made for a different human. It's really the world that we live in is made for no human, because it's all averaged out over time, right? Which is why I think it's so beautiful to, craft out our own individual spaces in awareness of that. And, it's something to be really mindful of, because no one is really going to feel like they perfectly fit in a shared space. Okay. So that's on neurodivergent symptom shame. It's just that you're the other, and where the shame comes in is when someone is expressing that to you, or when that's being expressed to you just like through a physical circumstance. Like if you think about someone with a disability, like my sister is legally blind, and in a lot of rooms, like there's not accommodations for that. So that's the inherent shame of her. She just feels wrong and weird because, you know, she can't see that step, and she's going to tumble over unless she has the accommodations for herself that she's brought in, because the circumstances aren't laid out that way for her, you know. So it's a really, and not to say this is the same as being blind, of course, but it's a similar idea, right? That because you're walking into a room that is made in a way that is not going to be perfectly accommodating to your needs, like there is still a little bit of this element of shame of like needing to cater to yourself and needing to, you know, have something different than what other people might need to be in the same room. So there's like the physical circumstances, which can create shame. And then of course the other piece is just like that actually being expressed to you verbally or through someone's attitude or whatever it may be. So someone like making a comment to you, othering you. That's the main thing that I can think of. And sometimes it's indirect. Like I would say the times in my life where I felt more shamed was not when someone came to me and said, hey, you're wrong because you are this. It's whenever I'm not being seen as what I am, and someone's saying something around me thinking that I'm not that, is when I felt more shame. And maybe some people can relate to that. I think that's a common thread in kink, is a lot of us keep it to ourselves. We don't really share, and we're not, you know, it takes a long time for people to join community typically. So because we're not around that community, and because we're around vanilla people, like vanilla people are going to make a comment that they don't realize is harmful, or maybe they do realize is harmful, but because they don't have the same desires and interests as you, they might make a comment about how, you know, someone's wrong for that, and being in a room thinking that, you know, someone thinking that that's an okay thing to say to you, or maybe even thinking that, you know, they think you might agree with it and that's why they are saying it. Oh, that's where the shame kicks in, at least for me. Okay. So there's all of those lovely pieces that kind of cultivate together to create a lot of shame, just around, your individual, super unique condition. And this isn't even talking about kink yet. This is just talking about, you know, neurodivergent symptoms that someone might express. But there's a lot of overlap, like you're probably already picking up on that. And this isn't really the advice portion yet, but I do want to say that what's been really, really helpful for me, as someone who used to be in a lot of rooms with vanilla people who would make some offhanded comments, was limiting my interactions with those people and changing up my friend group. At first, like the first baby step I took was like a lot of boundary setting and sharing myself with those people. So I remember being in like on a cabin trip with some friends, and my primary like friend in that group, who I'm still friends with today, you know, I shared a lot more in common with, but she had some of her friends there who, you know, I didn't share as many interests or values with. So while we were on that trip, I remember someone, like a friend of hers, saying something about rimming, like analingus, and saying that, like, you know, it was dirty or wrong. And I don't remember the quote because ADHD forgetfulness, but it was something about how, like, I could never like imagine letting someone do that to me, or I couldn't imagine ever doing that, or something like that. So in that moment, I set like a conversation boundary and I shared. So I said, oh, well, that's something that I like doing and receiving, and it feels really great. And well, I don't even know if that's exactly what I said, but that was the gist of it. And like later on in our trip, I think I also said something to the effect of, hey, can we just not like yuck someone's yum? Like, we obviously have different interests, and that's okay to have a different interest. But like where I took, was sensitive to that comment that you made was because you were expressing that you thought it was wrong, or that, you felt some sort of disgust towards people who did do that thing. And that's where the shame and the nastiness comes in the othering. So, and then of course, that wasn't even my friend, but in the context of our trip, that really set the standard for like, okay, after this time, like, we're not doing that. And also I just distanced myself from that person afterwards because, I don't need to be around someone who thinks what I'm into is wrong. And well, I think it's really lovely and valuable to be able to share space with people who do have different beliefs by just setting those boundaries around like what topics are and aren't on the table. There's still this layer of like, this person has not changed their mind around this thing. They still believe what I'm doing is wrong. And while I guess I could have conversations with them and try to change their mind, what would the point of that be? Because where this person is now in their life with their feelings, that's just not where I want to be. And I don't think that, I think that's where they want it to be. So I can't change others, but I can change myself, and I can change, who I'm deciding to spend my time around. And that can include limiting people who think what you're into is wrong and having access to your life. Okay, let's take a little break. We're almost all at the full episode length already, but we're going to come back and talk about the ADHD and BDSM communities, the overlap, and how being part of that intersection can be a little weird sometimes. All right, bye, bestie. Just a little break to share that if you are loving this podcast and my content, if I'm someone you could see yourself working with, but you're wanting more direct support for your specific situation, I do offer mentorship. It's personalized to you, private video or phone calls with me, so you can chat about your situation and figure out a solution that's going to work for you. You can visit my website. It is kinkybestie.com/mentorships to see what's available and to book in your spot on my calendar. It's kinky with a Y at the end and bestie with an IE at the end. The link will be in the show notes, so you can check it out there. Back to the show. Hi, bestie. We're back. Okay. We talked about how neurodivergent symptoms are oftentimes met with shame that we learned from, people's words, people's attitudes towards us, but also like our physical circumstances and the way that the world's built. Now let's talk about the intersection between the kink and BDSM community and ADHD, which we have already discussed at length in past episodes. So I'm not going to get into like why there is this strong link now, but you absolutely can listen to one of my past episodes about that. I'll link it in the show notes. I think it's called like why are ADHD and BDSM? No, that's not even what it's called. I'm going to stop pretending like I know what the episode is called because we're not doing that right now. But I'll find it later and have it linked in the show notes. So, okay. These communities, the neurodivergent community and the BDSM and kink community, there is a good bit of overlap, meaning that there are people who are part of both communities, myself included. So I am neurodivergent and I'm interested in BDSM, so I'm a part of both. And because it's not just me who's a part of both, I'm a part of that community of people who are part of both, which is a unique situation to be in. But let's go back to this comment that inspired this episode. And the comment was, I want to engage more with my kink in a constructive manner, but it just feels taboo. I want to address that being part of this crossover, there are members of each of those individual communities, meaning like the individual neurodivergent community and the individual BDSM community, who aren't really into this crossover, okay? So, of course, there's people who, just don't identify as being part of both, but there's also people within each community that think there's something wrong with linking the two together. Like, there are definitely people who are part of the neurodivergent community that think linking it to kink is wrong in one way or another. And while I don't see this as often in the BDSM community, just in my perception of it, though I'm sure that, your experience might be different, but I'm sure that there are people who are in the BDSM community who think, talking about this link or engaging with some typical like neurodivergent symptoms and like bringing that into their play is problematic too. I don't personally know anyone who believes that, but I'm sure that's a thing. So what's tricky is because each of these communities that we're a part of, they're not in that same subsection in the same way. And while I really value my little corner of the internet that I think I've helped to create in some ways, but I know has already existed there in many others, which is more of this intersection between people who are neurodivergent and people who are kinky, I've also gained a lot of value from being part of both of those individual communities as well. But where I find the difference is that BDSM and kink is an interest that I have and something I actively like to participate in. It's not necessarily something that I've, chosen to opt into because I have kinky desires, so that makes me kinky. But whereas even though just having those desires means that you are kinky, by being in the community and by participating in it, that is more of an active choice, because a lot of people still live this world of oh, I have my desires, and maybe sometimes, rarely, I live them out in private. But there's a lot of people who are kinky who are not actually getting to experience their kink because of shame or logistics or not understanding or whatever it is. Whereas for folks who are neurodivergent, those symptoms and those behaviors, that's part of, that is, it's a part of who you are, which being kinky is a part of who you are as well. The ADHD, it's kind of, or just being neurodivergent, that's just going to be baked into kind of every minute of every day. Because even when you are actively masking and choosing to hide your symptoms, to fit in one way or another, the fact that you have to mask is still you actively being neurodivergent. Whereas for a lot of people, and of course, we all are different, and so this might be totally different for someone else, but for a lot of people, for me, BDSM is more of, a sexual thing for me, absolutely. And I do incorporate some BDSM elements in more of my daily outside of the bedroom life, absolutely. But it's not something that I desire to in all areas of my life all of the time. Whereas being neurodivergent, you don't even come across the thought of oh, I desire to behave this way. It just is how you are going to behave because of how your brain is built and formed and things like that. So there's value in each community, but totally in different ways. So for me, what's been really helpful for me with engaging in the ADHD community, especially as I was learning about it and going through my diagnosis process, was kind of twofold. So it was definitely getting practical daily life help and help with understanding how medication works and understanding how being diagnosed works and all of that. But the other big part of it for me was just normalizing my symptoms and being around other people who had the same symptoms. Because I had lived so much of my life without a diagnosis and without really understanding this part of myself, I just always kind of thought I was a freak or there was something wrong or weird about me. So for me, a part of being in the ADHD community was, seeing video after video of people sharing, this is who I am and how I operate and what works well for me. And just having my eyes totally open and being humbled a bit too, to like, oh, this isn't me. This is a real thing. And it's a lot of these symptoms are shared experiences. And it was just realizing that and which is really beautiful for folks who share this ADHD or neurodivergent symptom of being sensitive to rejection. It's really comforting and validating to realize that you are part of a community. It's not that every other community is rejecting you, and to be accepted by a community. That is a really beautiful thing as well. Because in a lot of other communities, while I've been accepted on a surface level, I've still felt like I had to hide some of my ADHD symptoms or behave in a slightly different way to fit in, which never really felt authentic. So that's what I have gotten out of being in the ADHD community. But for me, part of being in that community was more valuable whenever I was just entering that world and learning about it and trying to gain a lot of understanding. But now that I have this understanding, I don't need that in the same way. And I don't gain the same value from that anymore. Now that I understand my symptoms and understand that other people portray them, it's not really valuable for me to see a million videos every day about someone just operating the way that I do. Now that I've kind of hit that level of well, duh. And of course, it's helpful here and there. But it's just, it's not valuable in the same way that it was before, when it was more of an eye-opening experience and a realization. Okay, so that's what a lot of people get out of the neurodivergent community, just because of the nature of what having, a neurocomplexity is. But with the BDSM or the kink community, I've gotten totally different value out of that. It's definitely been more about finding relationships and partnership, and finding, different ways to experience my kink and my desires, as well as a similar part of the neurodivergent exploration, which was normalizing it and realizing that I'm not a freak, and debunking a lot of shame by just being around people who have the same desires and are doing them and don't feel shitty about it. It was really empowering to realize that I could be the same way. And that, why would I feel shitty about it when this other person who has the same exact desires as me not only doesn't feel shitty about it, but they're fully living it and talking about it, and they have this desire and they're experiencing it. And I want to be doing that because this is a desire I have too. That's beautiful. So while there's, been that similar takeaway from being in both communities, is the normalizing it and debunking shame, being accepted by a community piece. There's also, for me, BDSM is more about leisure and pleasure. And because, this is more of an interest for me. So because I have ADHD and my brain is lacking in dopamine on its own, in order to engage with something, I have to be really interested in it. And the thing is that now that I understand how my ADHD brain works, I'm not really interested in it anymore. But I'll tell you what I am really interested in is sex and doing kink stuff and experiencing new things and being around other people doing the same things and experiencing it with them and seeing how they do it and it's just a totally different thing. But by being aware of what you can get from each community and the value of each, it shifts things a bit, because now you're able to accept that, like, hey, I can grow and change, and my interests can change over time, and what I need for my mental health and my self-development can change over time as I change over time. So the type of content you're consuming might change over time as well. And I would say that, people aren't always going to need me on their journey either. I actually think it's really beautiful whenever people, I've had this experience a couple times where someone has, found me, we've started working together and helped them through some lovely things, and then they hit this space of like settling into that new reality and feeling like stasis with it. And, then they don't need me for this next part of their journey where they're just doing the thing because they're just doing the thing, and it's beautiful. But they can come back to me whenever they realize that there's a new thing that they want to work through and grow and like change and learn about, because that's what I'm here for, and that's the part of someone's journey that I'm here to help with, is the growth and the accepting and trying and doing something new. So I just want to share that as well, that it is okay if I am a, quote unquote community that you move in and out of as well. And it's okay to move in and out of these other communities as well, as they serve you and as they don't. And if you're finding yourself feeling, shameful about who you are or how you operate or your desires or your behaviors or anything in a certain space, well, there are other spaces where you won't be. So this has been a long one. I will chat with you soon, friends. Thank you so much for hanging on to the end here. If you haven't seen it already, I think this episode will be posted before the end of the month, and on January 31st, 2024, is the last day to end a coaching giveaway with me. I'm giving away a month of free kink coaching, and you can enter with the link I'll have in my show notes. You just enter your email, you'll get a survey, because this is more of like a contest. Like, I'm not just giving it away to a random person. You gotta let me know what you want to work with, and we gotta make sure that we're a strong fit, because this is a one-on-one thing with me, not just like a product I'm shipping you in the mail, So go ahead and apply for that. You've got until the end of the month to do it, and we will chat later, friends. Okay, bye. Thank you so much for joining me this episode. You can follow the podcast on the platform where you're listening to get updates with new episodes. You can follow me on social media at Kinky Bestie. I'm on Instagram. You can also check the show notes for any links or resources that I talked about in this episode, or just more ways to connect with me. And please share this with your kinky friends who could benefit from this type of content. There is also an option for each podcast episode to engage with Q&As or polls. So I'd love to hear from you and create future episodes around what you want to chime in with. So please check those out in the show notes too. And I look forward to hearing from you. Bye.